This is the Patanjali Distinguished Speaker Series, which we've been conducting for some years. So I just want to say a few words about this. Who is Patanjali? Well, Patanjali, if you can read that, I guess it's much bigger on yours than it's on mine. So I just took something from Wiki to give you an idea. The Patanjali that we're referring to, there are several Patanjalis, by the way. The one that we're referring to with respect to this series is the Patanjali who authored the Yoga Sutras. And the Yoga Sutras are 196 Indian sutras in 4 chapters. You can read it yourself up here. And Patanjali was the person who put these things together. It's the ancient knowledge from people who came before him, and he put these together into the Yoga Sutras. There's some question about when he lived. It's not sure, but we always say it's before 400 CE. It may be as early as 200 or 300 years before BCE, but it's kind of lost in history. And there are other Patanjalis, and it's not clear whether they're the same person. Some of them is clear because there's a different time era. But Patanjali you come across. But the one we're talking about here with this is the Yoga Sutras author. And the idea was started some years ago with having a once-a-year seminar that reflects the spirit of Patanjali, not necessarily all about Yoga Sutras. So for example, in 2010 we had Eugene Taylor from Harvard Medical School who came and made a wonderful presentation about William James and pure experience and samadhi. The following year we had Robert Schneider from Maharishi University of Management. He's a cardiologist, well known for his research. And he spoke about mind, body, environment, and consciousness in Ayurveda. The year after, we had one of my mentors, medical psychologist Lawrence Lashan, and speaking on healing self and other, normality as shared neurosis. Larry Lashan authored one of the largest selling books on meditation. It's called How to Meditate. And he wrote it back in the 70s, and you can still buy fresh copies, new republications by going to Barnes & Noble or any other. Well, they'll have copies. It's been reprinted so many times. And to me, it's an excellent book in itself, worthwhile looking at. He wrote many other books, by the way, but one of his favorite topics was meditation. Then we had Martina Ziska, who was editor for a while of our Ayurveda health journal. We publish here a journal of Ayurvedic medicine. And she was, for a time, the editor of that. And a couple of years ago, we had a Vedic scholar from Stony Brook University, Andrew Nicholson, who came and talked about his Vedic scholarship and something. So that gives you an idea of what this is. And we have this once a year. And this year we're very pleased to have someone very, very special who's been here before, but not as a Patanjali distinguished speaker. And so we're very, very pleased to have him. This year we have Satbir Singh KHALSA, PhD, from Harvard Medical School, Brigham and Women's Hospital, but that's his day job. He has many other hats. As you'll see, he's the Director of Research for the Kundalini Research Institute. He's the Director of Research for the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health in Western Massachusetts. He's a research associate with the Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine. And there are a few other things, and I'm going to skip them because I think you get the idea. When we first were in contact this year, earlier in the year, I guess it was January or so, and we were trying to set this thing up, it was so hard. I wasn't sure we were going to be able to do it because his schedule is so full with things and events. So he's a very busy man, not a little due to the fact that he is invested in a yoga lifestyle, and he has been for many years. So he, as he puts it in his little bio here, he has been fully engaged in basic and clinical research on the effectiveness of yoga and meditation practices in improving physical and psychological health since 2001. And he's practiced a yoga lifestyle since 1971. So in addition to his work as a yoga instructor, a sought-after speaker, so we're very fortunate to get him here to be with us again today. He has a special interest in yoga in schools, which certainly is something that we, in the class IST 111, it is of high interest to us because that's what we are doing in IST 111. We're combining yoga and Western science. In any case, without further ado, I'm really delighted to be able to introduce to you my friend and colleague and delightful speaker, Satbir S. KHALSA.
It's an honor to be a part of the Patanjali series. Anyone who is familiar with yoga in any degree, Patanjali is a revered name because it's his sutras that really form a fundamental basis for a lot of the theory and philosophy surrounding yoga. And one of the things Patanjali pointed out was that it's primarily a meditative component. Although in the West you see other components, you've seen an evolution of other components within yoga practice, including the postures, the breathing techniques, and the meditation. And that is the full practice set of yoga. That's traditional yoga. That's historically what yoga was. It was originally a technique for developing deeper states of consciousness through achieving better states of health and brain functioning. And so when I talk about yoga, I'm talking about that style of yoga, because there's a lot of people that are practicing yoga in a very limited format. They're doing nothing but postures. And that's become popular. But what we're talking about, and most academics and scholars who work with yoga really talk about yoga as this comprehensive lifestyle practice. So this cartoon reads, in addition to 16 cup holders, it comes equipped with 4 dedicated yoga mat storage areas. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that yoga has become extremely popular in the West. And we have evidence for that. And it's not just popular in the West, actually, it's become very resurgently popular in India, largely due to actually one teacher named Swami Ramdev who goes around the country teaching to tens of thousands of people at a time. And he has his own satellite channel, and he's almost single-handedly revolutionized the popularity of yoga in India. But yoga now is pretty much popular internationally. This is a yoga center in Germany. This is International Yoga Day in Portugal. And we do have surveys that sort of verify this popularity of yoga. These surveys are mostly conducted in the US. This was done in early 2016. 36 million Americans are actively practicing yoga. That's a big number. Epidemiologically, 36 million people doing anything is big. But not only that, those people that were not practicing, if they had any expression of the fact that they were likely to try it, that's an additional 83 million. So not only is it popular, that popularity appears to be growing. And when you look at that growth in the surveys that were done in the previous 4-year intervals, you can see this enormous increase, jumping from 20 million to 36 million in 4 years. So this is what we would look at and call as an exponential trend, if anything. Now, this is also verified by a survey that was done by the federal government, by the Center for Disease Control and the National Institutes of Health. We're interested in studying integrated medicine practices in the general public. And this is the trend for yoga here. From 2002 to 2012, we now have 10% of the population actively practicing yoga for health purposes. So again, this is a very significant statistic, and again, you can see this exponential increase verified in this survey as well. So this was 4 years ago. So we're due for another survey, and I'm very interested to see where we're at in 2017. Now, anything that has those kinds of statistics, you would expect to see the evidence in the culture, and we do have that evidence. These are a couple of magazines well known to you. This cover says, dogs do it, kids do it, even desperate housewives do it. Why we've become a yoga nation. This, of course, is actress Eva Longoria, who played on that TV show, Desperate Housewives. This is famous model Christy Turlington, doing a posture I've never done, don't plan to do. And one of the problems with these kinds of images is that this is what the general public starts to think yoga is. And that is a problem, especially for those of us who are involved in using yoga for special populations or in clinical trials. People think you have to be flexible in order to practice yoga. It's something that thin, rich women who are wearing leotards do. And so that is a negative connotation that kind of sticks with yoga, unfortunately. Yoga is so popular that there are now 5 airports in the US and counting which have dedicated yoga rooms. You can practice yoga in these rooms during your layover from flight to flight. And these are major airports. This is San Francisco, Chicago O'Hare, and Dallas-Fort Worth. Pictures of kids practicing yoga outside with instructors here, and I draw your attention to this building. So during the 8 years of the Obama administration, during the Easter egg celebration on the White House lawn, we had yoga on the White House lawn as part of Michelle Obama's fitness program. Unfortunately, that is over with the administration. These are remarkable photographs of New York Times Square on June 21st. For the past 10 years, they've been holding an International Yoga Day celebration on New York Times Square. So it's an international icon that's taken over all day long by yoga practice. 17,000 people in New York City registered to practice yoga on New York Times Square. And some of you may know that the current Prime Minister of India is an avid yoga practitioner, a proponent of yoga. In fact, he addressed the United Nations on the topic of yoga. And he made 3 points in his address to the United Nations. Number 1 is that it's not just a physical practice, it's a holistic practice. Number 2 is that it can be a healing practice, especially for a lot of the disease that we have. And then finally, he argued for the adoption of International Yoga Day. And accordingly, in December 2014, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted International Day of Yoga. So this is significant. A lot of countries signed on to that resolution. So accordingly, in 2015, we saw the first International Day of Yoga. And here's Prime Minister Modi in New Delhi, in the capital of India. He's practicing with a few friends here. And you can get an idea of just how many friends from an aerial shot here. Wow. There's 30,000 good friends practicing yoga with him. And of course, this was celebrated internationally in many countries. This is the base of the Eiffel Tower in Paris. These are all yoga mats. This is China. They're very organized in China. This is Kazakhstan. And this is a school in Kabul, Afghanistan. So it really has an international following. It's become so embedded in society that the advertising industry is well aware of the image and the impression of what yoga is to the general public. So they're using this positive image of yoga to actually sell products that have negative connotations. So on the left-hand side, they're selling vodka. This is a vodka bottle doing a headstand on a yoga mat. And here they're selling an over-the-counter sleeping pill. This morning was brought to you by a good night's sleep. The idea being that if you buy their sleeping pill, you'll get a good night's sleep and be more willing to do your yoga in the morning. It's kind of like backwards, actually. So, and of course, you know you hit the big time when a big corporation like McDonald's is used it. So this was a few years ago. They had a DVD of yoga practice. And on my fruit and yogurt cup one day, there was somebody practicing unmistakably the yoga posture. So this cartoon reads, how is it we're the most successful species on the planet, yet we need to pay people to remind us to breathe and drink water? And it's true, as human beings, we don't have a lot of basic hygiene that comes, to us naturally, like some animals do. Animals have, they have hygiene that's built into their genes and their genetic makeup. We have to learn to brush our teeth. We have to learn body hygiene, mind hygiene, which is essentially what yoga is. So I'm a researcher in yoga, and some people who practice yoga may look at this quizzically and say, what's research got to do with yoga? I didn't go to yoga because I just read a research study, so why were we spending taxpayer dollars in doing research on yoga? And I can tell you, I feel like this cartoon. I'm one of those scientists that studies things that pretty much everyone already knows. So the rationale for doing research on yoga is actually a very important one. It comes from the demographics of that practice. You might say, well, why would you do research if so many people are already practicing? What's the point? It's already done. Well, the devil is in the details. And when you look at the breakdown of the demographics, it's really 75 to 80% women, so men are left out. It's really the middle-aged, so the children and the elderly are left out. And more disturbingly, it's well-educated and high-income populations. So it's really the privileged of society who have the resources and the knowledge to be able to access and practice yoga. So the people, presumably, that need yoga the most, lower socioeconomic minority classes, are left out of the picture. So how do we solve that with research? Well, there are several, and of course you see that disparity in children, because this is a talk about children. You can see again, it's really predominantly girls, and of course it's also skewed in terms of ethnicity. It's predominantly whites that are practicing yoga. So how do we get the entire population to practice yoga, and how does research fit into that? Well, there are systems in society that penetrate to all areas of the public, and that's the public schools, workplaces, and the healthcare system. If you can get yoga into those systems, you can get yoga across society. So you can make that happen if you can get yoga into those. And we are seeing a transition of yoga these days from ashram studios, yoga centers, gyms, and spas. We're starting to see it appear in professional society. Now, if we really want to make this happen, the problem with getting it into these places is that these places require evidence. They require validity, and that's where the research comes in. The research will feed that and justify the incorporation of yoga into these major societal components. Thanks to yoga, I now gently stretch to conclusions instead of jumping to them. And we're going to talk about emotional reactivity and stress reactivity, because those are major components of yoga practice. So let's talk about the psychophysiology of yoga. And we do have a good deal of information on this. This was an invited book from Harvard Health Publications that I agreed to do for the general public. And I only agreed to do this because it was attractive to have a book with the word yoga on it that also had the Harvard Medical School logo in their name on it. And this is also a sign of the times, because I can tell you 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, this would have been inconceivable. And in fact, they approached me again recently to do a book, which was a Harvard Medical School Special Health Report, An Introduction to Yoga, and I served as the medical editor on this book. But we have summaries of the research and the summaries of the clinical research in this book that we recently published. This is a medical textbook that we published with 90 contributors, 60 yoga researchers contributing to this book. And in a chapter on this book, we talk about the psychophysiology of yoga, although this is really targeted more at the clinical application of yoga. But this is sort of the tip of the spear. This is yoga moving into professional society. This is our face to medicine and to professional society, to the workplace, and to the education system. In any field of science, when you start to see abundance of evidence of clinical trials in a certain area, scientists start to review that. And we do have reviews of the psychophysiology of yoga, this one here on reducing stress, on neurocognitive mechanisms, and on self-regulatory mechanisms, describing all the research about what we know about how yoga works. But let's start historically a little bit. These are scientists that traveled all over India finding these advanced yogis and hooking them up to see what was going on physiologically with them. And the conclusion from this year-long study was that physiologically, yogic meditation represents deep relaxation of the autonomic nervous system. Now this is highly significant because the autonomic nervous system was called autonomic because it was believed to be automatic. In other words, you had no input into that system. And this is the system that's responsible for your reaction to stress and emotion. And it mediates that response. So when you get upset, when your heart starts to race, that's your autonomic nervous system. That's your sympathetic drive being activated. So the idea that these yogis could control that system introduced a new concept. And this concept is the concept of self-regulation. The idea that humans, through certain practices, can develop the skill of controlling their internal state. And that includes their body, their autonomic nervous system, their breathing, their central nervous system, virtually many different aspects. And this is a central tenet of mind-body medicine. However, it's a tenet which is largely ignored in modern medicine. In modern medicine, the patient is viewed as a passive entity. Now, jumping forward to the present, some of the cutting-edge areas of research we have in this area, one of them is so-called neuroimaging. It uses these large machines, this fMRI that you see in the background, which can scan the brain and look with high resolution at specific nuclei in the brain and look from second to second and identify what's going on in the brain and where. And this gives you a great sense of where meditation can be active, because you bring a meditator, you put him in the scanner, have him meditate, and then you can see how his brain works. And this picture here is Richie Davidson, one of the leaders in this field, and Matthew Ricard, one of the leaders, a monk who's a leader in the field of mindfulness meditation. And one of the kinds of studies that have been conducted using neuroimaging have been taking these advanced practitioners and putting them into the scanner and asking the question, do their brains behave in the same way as non-meditators or non-yoga practitioners? And the answer to that question is yes. And it matches what we see differently in terms of behavior. In other words, the changes that we see in brain functioning appear in structures that underlie the attention network and also those that relate to emotion and autonomic function. And we know that meditation is the control of attention. So it's not surprising that you're engaging the attention networks and getting better at doing that. It's also not surprising that you're engaging the emotions and autonomic function through that self-regulation path. So the brain changes that we see are consistent with the behavioral changes that we're recording. Now, another example, another feature of the central nervous system is so-called neuroplasticity. This is the ability of the brain to change its connections and its structure. In other words, the more time you spend doing something, the more the brain responds by actually changing its structure in coordination with that change. It's like your biceps get thicker when you do a lot of weightlifting over the course of the month. That's muscle plasticity. If you're a London taxi driver, you have a map of London in there. And that takes up a lot of neural connections and blood flow and glial cells, et cetera, to take up space to give you that map of London. So the question is, if you practice yoga over the long term, do you see changes in brain structure as well? And the answer is yes. So this is a study that was done by our National Institutes of Health. And what they were looking at was cold pain tolerance, the ability to tolerate cold pain. And the yogis were here in the black dots. They had higher tolerance to pain than did the non-yoga practitioner. Furthermore, that area of the brain that's involved in pain regulation, in terms of the volume of that area, was larger in the yoga practitioners than in the non-yoga practitioners. And that change in volume was practice dependent. In other words, the longer you had been practicing yoga, the bigger that area of the brain has become. So not only when you practice yoga over the long term, not only do you make behavioral changes in terms of how the brain behaves, you're also changing the brain structure itself. And that, of course, goes hand in hand with your ability to do these practices. Another example is this cognitive function called fluid intelligence, a high-level functioning, which we know deteriorates with aging. So this is the non-yoga practitioners deteriorating with age. And yoga and meditation in this study were shown to dampen that decline. In other words, there's an anti-aging effect on this high-level cognitive function. So there's something obviously very powerful and very important in the practice of meditation that is allowing the brain to maintain its cognitive functioning at a high level. Now, we're studying meditation. And meditation is, in its most simple definition, is the focus of attention. And it can be done in different ways. You can focus on a single point, so-called concentrated meditation. or so-called mindfulness meditation, in which you're meditating on the flow of thought or the flow of sensation. In any case, what you are doing is focusing your attention. When you focus your attention, your mind is not wandering. You have a choice. You can either focus your attention or you allow the mind to wander. It's one or the other. So not only are scientists starting to study meditation, they're also starting to study mind wandering. In mind wandering and meditation, the first definition that I'm aware of, it's a little uncertain, but it's likely the Upanishads predated Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. But this is the first citation of how meditation works that I'm aware of. So in the first quote here, this is actually talking about mind wandering. This mind of mine is extremely restless. The mind wanders among objects as a monkey does from tree to tree. So nothing has changed in 2,000 years in terms of the human brain. Still the same kind of thing. You're sitting in the doctor's office and it's thought after thought after thought after thought. Mind wandering. So here's the definition of meditation. The man who has a discriminating intellect as his driver and a controlled mind as the reins reaches the end of the path, that supreme state of Vishnu. The analogy is of a charioteer driving with horses, and the horses are the thoughts. And the more you can control those thoughts, the more you can achieve a better state of mind. So that's the whole idea, control of thought, control of attention. Now, as I said, scientists are studying meditation, but now they're also asking this question of, hey, what is this mind wandering anyways? And so there's actually a study that was done by Harvard scientists, published in our premier biomedical journal, Science, a few years ago. And they studied mind wandering in the general public. Their main conclusion from the study was that people's minds wandered frequently, regardless of what they were doing. So here you go. You've just verified the Upanishads. Now, the interesting part of the study is here. People were less happy when their minds were wandering than when they were not. So that's interesting. Why would we have a lower mood state when we allow our minds to wander? Well, if you think about it, we're really geared for survival. So what is the content of a lot of mind wandering? It's actually analyzing mistakes of the past, predicting problems in the future. That's what we spend a lot of our time mind wandering about. All of that stuff is pretty emotional. It's pretty stressful. If you do that 24/7, 365 days a year, unabated, you're going to get a mood disturbance. Because what are you doing? You're feeding the limbic system. You're allowing the limbic system to go into that mood state and that emotional reaction and that stress reaction. And we now know that people who end up doing a lot of mind wandering and a lot of rumination are actually more at risk for mood disorders and ultimately psychiatric conditions. And we have evidence that meditators are actually becoming fairly immune to mood disturbance and psychological conditions. So, this is shown nicely in a study that was done in a neuroimaging scanner. What they did was they brought people in and said, meditate in the scanner. But when you first notice that your mind is wandering, this happens all the time in meditation, you have to catch yourself and then bring your focus back. When you first notice that your mind is wandered, press the event marker. So now they were able to scan the brain in the different phases of meditation. During the focus phase, when they were actually successfully holding their attention, and not surprisingly, it's the attention networks in the prefrontal dorsolateral prefrontal cortex that were activated. This is the executive brain. This is where the attention networks are. No surprise there. When the mind was wandering, the default mode network was activated. And that's a much more diffuse collection of brain regions that are being activated during that type of brain activity. So you can see these are very, very distinctly different. And we're now seeing a lot of evidence about this default mode network, that when it's allowed to take over, and you spend a lot of time in the default mode network activity, you are more at risk for developing mood disturbance. So we're starting to see the underlying psychological, psychobiological underpinnings of how meditation has these positive benefits in the mood state. Now, the other cutting edge area, which is just starting to be applied and has a huge future, is the idea of molecular biological approaches. This slide here shows the central dogma of biology, which is that genes make transcripts, which make mRNA, which make proteins. And it's the proteins that do everything in the body. This is what this is how the body functions. What we know about this is that there's input at many different levels. In fact, there's also input to the genes themselves. Now, you can't change the genes, but what you can change is their activity. You can turn genes off and you can turn them off. So, for example, if you sit on the couch all day long and eat fatty foods and smoke cigarettes and don't have physical activity, you are likely turning on tumor genes, cancer genes. On the other hand, if you adopt healthy behavior, you're probably turning those genes off. So the question is, does yoga and meditation do anything to genetic expression? And the answer is yes. So a couple of studies have been done. This is one that was done at UCLA. And what they used was a yogic meditation practice for chronically stressed individuals. And they looked at which genes were being activated. And in these chronically stressed individuals, they showed suppression of the expression of inflammation-related genes and the upregulation of expression of genes involved in antiviral and immunoglobulin responses. And what we know about chronic stress, of course, is that it impairs immune function. It causes inflammation. And so these yoga practices were doing things to genes the way you want them. In other words, turning off inflammation and upregulating immune function. And Herbert Benson's lab at Mass General has shown similar results, but they have also shown changes in metabolic genes and also in genes involved in stress. So clearly, again, we're seeing that the genes that are involved and are affected by these practices are consistent with what we see behaviorally with these practices. We see suppression of stress, we see a reduction of emotional reactivity, we see increase in attention, and we see improvement in immune function. Now, one of the things that I keep coming back to is this whole idea of stress management. Virtually every study that has looked at stress that has used a meditation or yoga intervention has shown improvements in stress. And so now we have reviews of this, and this is actually one of the biggest reasons why people practice yoga. This was a survey study we did of beginners yoga practitioners published a few years ago. And stress management is virtually 75% of people are coming to yoga for stress management. So it is a central drive to yoga's potential for people. And, of course, we now have many papers published, so not surprisingly, there are reviews of this. And the reviews summarize this and conclude that yoga is a promising modality for stress management. So it plays a key role. And stress is very, very important because stress plays a huge role in the etiology of diseases and the maintenance of symptoms of diseases. And you'd be surprised how many diseases have stress as a major component. In other words, the biggest drive for the appearance of depression is actually chronic unmanaged stress. Type 2 diabetics have high levels of chronic stress. So it is very common in many disease states and actually contributes to the severity of symptoms in many diseases. So in that same population of beginner students that we evaluated, we gave them the perceived stress scale before and after their yoga beginners program. Not surprisingly, we got a statistically significant improvement in perceived stress. And in fact, I've been working, a large part of my work now is with the KHALSA Center for Yoga and Health, in which we're conducting studies of programs that they are running for employees, for corporate workers, for frontline providers. And this is a study that was done in a residential program at the Kripalu Yoga Center. We brought people in for 5 days. Not surprisingly, it's a great environment, so not surprisingly, they had reductions in stress at the end of the program and increases in resilience at the end of the program. So that, of course, is a spa effect, you could argue. But 6 months later, they still had gains in perceived stress and actually maintained gains, certainly, in resilience. So the skills, the yoga skills they learned in that 5-day retreat actually manifested in long-term gains when they went back to their home environment. Frankly, counselor, I don't care how stressful this is for your client. Tell them to get out of that damn yoga position. So it is really a hallmark of yoga, this whole idea of stress management. We're going to come to that in a moment. Now, another key aspect of yoga practice is the development of mind-body awareness. The yoga instructor in a yoga class is constantly saying, keep your focus, pay attention, meditate. That is the focus of attention. That inculcates mind-body awareness. And we have evidence that that does increase in long-term yoga practitioners. And we measure what we call mindfulness, which is that mind-body awareness. So this is a study looking at long-term yoga practitioners. And when they looked at mindfulness, it was strongly correlated with practice frequency and years of practice. In other words, the more you practice yoga, the more you become mindful. Evidence from another study. In this study, they had two groups, basically yoga practitioners and non-yoga practitioners. And they divided the yoga practitioners into people who were marginally practicing, those who practiced moderately, and those who had high levels of practice. Now, the control group scored on the Freiburg Mindfulness Inventory, scored 78 and 77 in the marginal. So marginal yoga doesn't do much for mindfulness. But as soon as you start moderate yoga practice, you jump from 77 to 84. If you do high levels of yoga practice, you jump further to 92. So clearly, there's a dose-dependent effect. The more you practice yoga, the more you're going to develop and increase mindfulness and mind-body awareness. And we've shown this on the short term. Those are long-term practitioners. Those are long practices. This is a 6-week intervention at the Tanglewood Music Center in Western Massachusetts. We took summer students who came to their training program with the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and it's a stressful program. We gave them 6 weeks of yoga, and we measured their mindfulness. And indeed, they increased in levels of mindfulness compared to a control group from the same group that did not practice yoga. And subscales of that questionnaire, the mindfulness questionnaire, showed improvements in observing and awareness compared to the control group. So that mindfulness and mind-body awareness immediately improves with yoga practice. And we see this as well in this Kripalu program, and this is a program that we now took into the business setting, into the corporate setting, and into a corporate program of yoga practices, and we saw increases in mindfulness. This is a trend because we're just in the process of getting a larger sample size, and you can see also the trend in all of the subscales of that mindfulness questionnaire. Now, finally, I'd like to talk about the contemplative nature of yoga. And actually, historically, yoga was a contemplative practice. The goal of yoga practice was to achieve samadhi, these unitive, these deep and profound unitive states of consciousness. And I see yoga practice on a temporal domain. So in the short term, there's, and this happens over the course of minutes, certainly over yoga class, there's the psychophysiological reduction in arousal, sympathetic drive goes down, there's a sense of physical and mental well-being. This happens over literally minutes, and this is so-called relaxation response as coined by Herbert Benson. It's the body's innate ability to reduce that psychophysiological arousal, to bring the stress systems down, to bring emotional reactivity down. Now, as people practice over weeks and months, it's a learned skill. So they start to develop more mind-body awareness, resilience to stress, equanimity in the face of emotions, and this whole construct of self-regulation. People become enabled. They're able to handle stress better. They're able to handle their emotions more effectively. They're better in terms of their mindfulness. They're more mind-body aware. And then finally, over months and years, what I think happens is actually a psychological, philosophical transformation. Not happens to everybody, but a lot of people experience this, and it's a change in life perspective. People actually use the phrase, yoga changed my life. It's that profound of a change. When people change their values, they change their view on life, they change their life purpose and meaning. They go from a materialistic to a non-materialistic goal in life. And this is a very profound transformation that takes place. And where it comes from, I think, is through some experiences that happen during the meditation and the yoga, which are brief glimpses of this unitive state of consciousness. It is so profound a state that it actually changes people on a permanent basis. Once you've tasted that experience, you can't go back. And so people actually make profound changes experiencing that deep contemplative state. And we have some evidence for that. The evidence for this, of course, is much weaker. And so this is a study we did with long-term yoga practitioners. This was an internet survey. We showed that experiences of transcendence were strongly correlated with amount of practice time. Total lifetime hours, total candle years, and how many hours per week they were practicing. This was a study that was conducted a number of years ago on the yoga ashram residents, asking them, compared to non-ashram residents, where they were, what their experiences were. And this is the percentage of respondents agreeing to these statements. Becoming aware of a new reality, 90% of ashram residents, only 70% of non-ashram residents. Feeling a personality change, 90% versus 50%. A change in life, 87% versus 64%. Experience of oneness, 83% versus 40%. And in touch with the divine or spiritual, 91% versus 43%. So you can see that there's something about ashram resident, that this intense practice of yoga that really can enhance these experiences. And we asked the question, can we get this on the short term? And musicians and many other performers do experience this state of flow. It's a state of unity within an activity. There's a sense of timelessness, there's a sense of peace and joy, there's a sense of non-duality. You can't distinguish between yourself and what's going on around you. It's a very profound and beautiful state of mind. When we tried to see if these musicians would have that enhanced over 6 weeks of Kripalu yoga. And indeed, we did see that. So this is the dispositional flow scale, which measures this construct of flow, and you can see that the yoga group had a nice increase, the control group was unchanged. And in a subscale of that questionnaire, autotelic experience, which is the actual samadhi experience, we saw an increase in that as well. So it is possible to do research on this very subtle and elusive state of mind. So this is a summary slide, a logic model. It really summarizes everything that we know right now about the psychophysiology of yoga practices. Again, my definition of yoga is this multi-component practice, this Ashtanga yoga. And of course, on the physical level, we're increasing fitness, flexibility, strength, coordination, balance. We're doing breathing practices. We're improving respiratory function, which actually leads to self-efficacy of the body. You become more confident in your body and its movement and its function. I talked about self-regulation, particularly about emotion regulation and stress regulation, which leads to these skills and states of resilience to stress and equanimity in the face of strong emotions. And that, of course, gives you psychological self-efficacy. You're going to have a little bit more control over your own life. You're not a cork on the ocean as much. You're going a little bit deeper, and the waves are above you, and there's more stability of stress and emotion. I talked about mind-body awareness through engaging the attention networks, increasing mindfulness, which ultimately increases cognition, your ability to concentrate, and an important feature of what we call metacognition. This understanding that this mind wandering is not you. You're able to sit back and watch that mind wandering. That's an important construct to achieve, and it's the construct that actually underlies the most popular form of psychotherapy today, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. And meditation produces that sense of metacognition. And then finally, spirituality. These experiences of transcendence, these unity states, the flow states, which leads in many people to an actual transformation in their lives, changing life, meaning, and purpose. So you're working on multiple different levels, and of course that leads to global changes in functionality, all the way from the gross things, so physical and mental health, physical, mental, and emotional performance, to more subtle things of positive behavior change, social responsibility, values, relationships, and ultimately the deepest experiences of quality of life, life purpose and meaning, and even spirituality. So this is why yoga has such a powerful impact. It works on so many levels that virtually anyone who practices it over, diligently over a period of time will experience some or all of these types of benefits. So now you have information to make a more informed choice at the health club. You can now be one with yourself and clear your mind with yoga, or you can choose to continue to be oblivious and mindless with a TV and a treadmill. It's your choice. You now have the evidence of the benefits of yoga practice and how it affects brain functioning and body function. I think the best place to put yoga, there's a whole field of yoga therapy in which yoga is being applied in clinical populations. I give talks on this and I'm involved in this field. But to me, the most powerful place to put yoga is in prevention. Why wait for a disease to become established? Why not prevent that disease from occurring in the first place? And this makes a lot of sense to me. Modern medicine, however, is not very good at prevention. Are you eating properly and getting plenty of exercise? And as you can see, the doctor himself is not doing so. And we have right now the biggest burden in our healthcare system, the biggest burden in society, in fact, I would argue, is an epidemic of so-called non-communicable disease. These are preventable, lifestyle-related diseases. And we're talking about diseases like hypertension, heart disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes, obesity, and depression. These are due to lifestyle habits, preventable lifestyle habits, particularly ones like lack of physical activity, poor dietary choices, lack of control of stress management. And these are the leading cause of death in the world, period. This is the burden that we face in modern healthcare. And it's not in Africa, it's not in high minority countries. These are mostly in high and middle income countries. The United States is number 3 in type 2 diabetes in terms of prevalence. So this is a huge problem in society. Not only that, but the prevalence of these deaths are projected to increase. So this is not only highly prevalent, it's growing. And I think there's 3 factors that contribute to those lifestyle factors. One is the inability to manage stress. In this society, we do not have stress management strategies, neither in our schools nor in our healthcare systems. In fact, teachers are burned out and doctors are burned out because they don't have the strategies themselves. So we're walking around with no strategies to manage stress. And this increase in the popularity of yoga, I believe, is a direct measure of people voting with their feet. They've found a strategy that does work. We are, as a society with very poor mind-body awareness. People are enacting these very unhealthy behaviors, and they're not even experiencing the consequences on their body. They're not even tuned into their bodies to the extent that they can experience that. And yoga can increase that mind-body awareness, which leads ultimately to positive behavior change because people gravitate to behaviors that make them feel better. And then again, I think on a larger perspective, I think we are still largely a rat race. The goal of most people in society is to become successful in their occupation, to become wealthy, to have a 3-car garage with 3 Mercedes in it. That's the pinnacle of what our society still views as successful. And we know for a fact that those kinds of materialistic life goals do not lead to life satisfaction. You need something deeper. You need a more spiritual goal if you really want to be fully satisfied and have life purpose and meaning. And I think yoga can work on those levels. However, in modern society, we have a system which is called the acute care model. In other words, we treat the symptoms. We don't treat the underlying causes. So in this cartoon, I mean, we're spending all of our efforts designing laser-guided mops to clean up the mess, but nobody cares and is spending much effort in addressing the underlying cause. And that is a problem. And you don't go to the doctor until you're sick. And that is a backward system. What we need to have is doctors spending more time with prevention so that the patient doesn't have to come in with the disease state. So, does yoga work in this vein? Does yoga prevent disease? And we do have some evidence that that is the case. So this is a study of long-term yoga practitioners. They're excellent. Their health is excellent or very good. They've never smoked or quit, and they have high or moderate levels of physical activity. In terms of mental health, in terms of how they are flourishing, twice as many long-term yoga practitioners are flourishing as compared to the general population. So they're reporting better physical and mental health. Furthermore, they're also attributing that improvement in health to the yoga practice. So this is, again, a survey of long-term yoga practitioners. When the question was asked, my health has improved because of yoga, 90% of them strongly agreed with that statement. I am happier because of yoga. 86% strongly agreed to that statement. So not only are they healthier, they're attributing yoga to that as the cause for that. And so you could argue that, well, those are long-term yoga practitioners are weird. They're weird in the first place. You have to be weird to start to practice yoga. So you're not really studying the effects of yoga, you're studying the effects that they were weird in the first place. They got good genes, they had good parents they were loved. So that's a valid scientific argument. So the answer to that is to do a prospective study. You take naive people out of the general population and then have some practice yoga for 10 years and others don't practice yoga. And we'd like to do those studies because I believe that would show, in fact, that it is the yoga itself that's doing this. But we have one little small study here that I can show you. This was a study, a randomized controlled trial, 2 groups, one practicing yoga, the other not. They measured levels of physical activity. The levels of physical activity in the yoga group over the course of the intervention increased. And this is not just yoga, but any form of physical activity. So there's something about yoga practice that enhanced people's willingness to be more physically active, which of course is a major factor in non-communicable disease. And they concluded that the acute feeling responses to yoga classes were favorable and may have been a key contributor to participants' improved perceptions of ability, which may have further fostered adherence. In other words, they were getting better at their bodies, so they spent more time with physical activity. But this is my favorite conclusion here. Participants reported an increased self-awareness as a result of their experience. So they're practicing yoga, they're increasing their mind-body awareness. They go out and they exercise and they say, wow, that felt good. How come I never felt that before I started yoga practice? It's because they increase their mind-body awareness. So now they go to exercise and they say, I want to exercise because I feel good after that. So I'm going to do more exercise because I want to. And I'm going to stop smoking cigarettes because, geez, I never knew how bad this felt until I started practicing yoga. So you gravitate away from negative experiences because you don't like the negative effect on your body, and you gravitate towards positive experiences because you like that effect on your body. So you're working from the bottom up in terms of changing your lifestyle behavior. That's the beauty of yoga as compared to the top-down model in medicine, where the doctor gives you a set of recommendations: eat better, get more exercise, without giving you strategies as to how to achieve it. So where's the best place to put preventive medicine? And of course the answer is in our children and adolescents. And our children and adolescents have a huge amount of problems, largely stemming from stress, which leads to behavior, mental health, attention, academic problems, physical health. It's a big problem. In fact, the majority of mental health problems in adults actually started in adolescence. So that's a strong argument for prevention. Furthermore, there's a need for treatment of largely untreated child-adolescent disorders, and that's highlighted in this study, which followed regular children from age 9 to 19, looking at the cumulative prevalence of the odds of having a single psychological, clinically significant condition. It's 80%. It's a staggering number, suggesting that the experience of psychiatric illness is nearly universal. And you ask any principal, any school teacher, and they will say, oh yeah, I see this every day. I see my kids are not capable of coping with emotion and stress. So, does yoga work for kids? Yes, it does. And we have evidence for that. This is a review paper published in 2009, summarizing the work on yoga for clinical conditions in children and adolescents. A more recent study showing, again, evidence for this and giving a guide for clinicians as to how to apply yoga effectively for children. In our book, Principles and Practice of Yoga in Healthcare, we have a chapter devoted to yoga therapy for pediatrics, authored by a leader in the field, in this field of research at UCLA. And we also have popularity growing in the culture with yoga practice. So this is now the fourth episode of this conference, the National Kids Yoga Conference coming up. And this is actually a movement where a lot of people are starting to teach yoga to adolescents and children. So where's the best place to reach kids? Schools. They're a captive audience. You get them all. It's a law that kids have to go to school. So if you put yoga in the school, you get a chance to see the effects on all the kids. And so that's where we're focusing. This cartoon reads, I switched from yoga to visualization for relaxation. I picture a world in which students with discipline problems attend my class online from their homes. And teaching the children is not easy. It takes special skills. And so there are a number of groups that are doing this kind of practice. But the whole construct of yoga in education is not new. This is Swami Vivekananda, one of the leaders that brought yoga to the West. And he said the practice of meditation leads to mental concentration. The very essence of education is concentration of mind, not the collection of facts. If I had to do my education once again, I would not study facts at all. I would develop the power of concentration and detachment. This is a beautiful statement because it really focuses on the important aspects of what it is to be a human being. And even William James, a leader in the field of education and a Harvard Medical School professor in the late 1800s, said the faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. No one is master of himself if he have it not. An education which should improve this faculty would be the education par excellence. He's talking about control of attention. He's talking about meditation. And actually it was predicted in this major publication back in 1914 that the health and welfare of a child will be regarded as one of as much importance as arithmetic and geography. And I can tell you that that prediction has completely failed, because it is not. Child and the health and welfare of children is receiving short shrift. There are a few wellness programs, but largely our education system is still driven by making worker bees in society. And a lot of kids are suffering because they don't have the behavioral skills to cope with life. So we have actually published this paper, which is a rationale for why yoga should be taught in the schools. It goes through the psychophysiology, it goes through the burden that kids are facing, and it reviews some of the evidence of the studies already conducted. There's a group called the Yoga Service Council, which published this white book, which basically addressed all the issues about how yoga could be implemented in schools, the nuts and bolts of how to teach it, where to teach it, how to structure it, etc., etc. And this has also been published, this whole idea of mind-body therapies in children and youth is published in a recent edition of Pediatrics this year, actually. In fact, the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health views this as an important area. This was a meeting they conducted, an all-day workshop at NIH, looking at research on mind-body therapies for children. And they started the session, you guessed it, with a meditation practice. Here we are at NIH doing meditation. There are conferences on this now as well. This is a conference that's held in Mumbai in India. This is a conference that's held in London. And these are recurring conferences on the whole idea of yoga and education. We published a paper summarizing this movement of yoga in schools, that there are 36 established programs with established curricula, training programs, training yoga instructors how to teach yoga to children and how to teach yoga in schools. So this is a movement that's growing. And in fact, many of these have been in existence for quite a while. Just from those groups alone, they're impacting 940 schools with over 5,000 trained instructors. So there are reviews of the studies that have actually been done on yoga in schools. This is one of those reviews. And this is a beginning field, so they're only showing a few studies, and actually some of the studies are showing negative effects. So this is a growing field, and we're starting to wrap our heads around what the best measures are and how to best implement these interventions and study them. And this is a review paper I published at the beginning of 2016, which summarized all of the publications that have been done so far on research studies on yoga in schools, and at that point in time, less than 50 studies, 47 publications. So this is really a nascent field. This is brand new, and it needs a lot of work. But just to give you a sense of what it looks like, these are the publications over time, and you can see this rapid increase in the number of publications in the past 10 years. So this field is exploding, as are the quality of studies. These are the randomized controlled trials within this population. So not only the quantity is increasing, but also the quality of this research is increasing. And the outcomes we see, really the same as what we see in adults. The effects of yoga on children are similar to the effects of yoga in adults. Stress coping, stress regulation, physical emotional arousal, aggression, hostility, anger, mood, anxiety, depression, etc. And it's the same in the qualitative studies. Positive experience with the yoga, better kinesthetic awareness, stress reduction and coping, managing negative emotions. Same things over and over again. Yoga works in the same way. This is a study, just to give you an example, this is a study that was done in a charter school at UCLA, a single group trial showing reductions in perceived stress and increases in resilience. And studies that we published in a school in western Massachusetts showed an interesting trend. And these were done as randomized controlled trials with high school students in western Massachusetts. And one thing we found was that on a number of outcome measures, mental health outcome measures, looking at improvement in the yoga group, you can see modest changes, if anything. Very close to no improvement whatsoever. But when we look at the control group that did not practice yoga, you can actually witness this deterioration in mental health that our children are experiencing over a single semester. So this is a phenomenon you're all familiar with. It's the phenomenon that high school sucks. Okay? Now what yoga does is it makes high school suck less. It's as simple as that. This is preventive medicine. This is preventing this decline in mental health. Now, if we had yoga for more than a single semester, I would argue that we could probably even make improvements on these outcomes. And we've seen this pattern in other outcomes as well. This is a study we looked at grades. These are the control kids with a steady decline all the way down. These are the yoga kids with a decline. The yoga started here. They maintained their grades when they were doing yoga. Bring the evidence, the scientific evidence, to justify the incorporation of yoga in schools. We can implement this at this point in time and hopefully change this outcome to a better one. Thanks for your attention.
Hi.
Bye.
I have a question about the research process when you're working with kids who are younger than high school, say elementary school kids, because like you're saying, the outcomes, measuring the outcomes is so important.
Good.
But how can you do you do self-reports? Because we generally do self-reports as elementary school kids. How are those
Right.
kinds of outcomes measured?
So elementary, the younger the kids, the more the problem in terms of the outcome measure, because you're relying on self-report, and youngsters like that are not that good at self-report. And so there's also very few questionnaires that are validated in that younger population. So you do what you can. You try and make a simple questionnaire. I mean, so for example, there's happy face, sad face kind of thing, and so you do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's the kind of questionnaire you can implement in that young age. The other thing you can rely upon, though, in elementary school, the virtual elementary school, is that the teacher's with the kids all day. So now you have teacher reports, and those are not too bad. Parent reports, parents usually are not aware of what's going on with their kids, so that's available, but not quite as good. But you can have those third-party reports that are also useful. There's not, unfortunately, that much that you can measure objectively. You can take saliva samples for stress and so on, but that becomes rather complicated. But in terms of intervention, I mean, my wife teaches preschool. Now, they're not doing headstands and complicated yoga things, but they are learning mind-body awareness. They're learning self-regulation. She can take a bunch of 3-year-olds that are bouncing off the walls, and at the end of the yoga class, they're all lying still. I mean, that is a miracle in and of itself, that kind of self-regulation using these practices. They're learning the basics of self-regulation of mind-body awareness, which is what yoga is all about.
Thanks. Yeah, when we were talking about this, wow, it's so important to have the research there. But how can
Yeah, it is. There's pros and cons to the adolescents and pros and cons to the elementary school studies. Both have their challenge. Yes, sir.
I found that you have combined yoga and meditation together, all that activity. A lot of places they have just separated the meditation part in student discipline, all those things for special control. They have that. So yoga comes with the meditation in yoga.
So for all of us who are yoga researchers, for us meditation is part of yoga. There's no question. We don't talk about yoga as a physical exercise. That's not what yoga is. Virtually in every study, yoga is being applied in the Ashtanga format with the asana coming out of deep meditation. And that is important. And I think that that's much more effective than just doing asana. Having said that, asanas do have benefits. So you can do a study with just asanas, and you will see improvements as compared to regular exercise. And of course, when you talk to somebody in India and you say yoga and meditation, they're confused. They look at you and they say, what do you mean yoga and meditation? They're the same thing. What do you mean yoga and meditation? But in the West, we have it as different disciplines. There are people that practice so-called vipassana or mindfulness meditation, and they are practicing just meditation. People who practice transcendental meditation, just practicing meditation, not yoga. And then there are people who are practicing yoga, where meditation is a very word. No, we don't practice meditation, we're doing yoga. So there's a little confusion here. But for both, those of us who have a scholarly understanding of what yoga is, it is this traditional component.
Yeah, and in fact, yoga, the term itself means yoga means
It means union, yes, of course. And that union, as far as I'm concerned, means that unitive state of consciousness. Yes?
So most of the data is just yoga and non-yoga.
Well, it depends on the study. I mean, yoga versus weightless control or yoga versus no treatment control is the most popular study done because it's the cheapest. It costs twice as much to give an active intervention to the control group. The most commonly used active control condition is exercise. So for example, in our yoga in school studies, we took kids from their phys ed classes. We replaced their phys ed with yoga. So we're actually comparing yoga with their regular phys ed.
Is there any, I am not aware of any data where there is a comparison of yoga with either aerobic or karate or taekwondo or whatever?
Not so much martial arts, but there is comparison. There are a number of studies that have compared yoga with exercise. Yeah, that has been used. Not a huge amount, but it has been used.
How was that data?
Well, the yoga tends to be better on measures of stress and emotion regulation. Yoga is much more effective than regular exercise in terms of stress management and emotion regulation, and certainly mind-body awareness. Because aerobic exercise does not engage in mind-body awareness. The other thing about aerobic exercise, it often doesn't use breathing practices. And so those are things that are very powerful in yoga that aerobic exercise does not have. And the other thing about the asanas as compared to aerobic exercise, the asanas are much more focused on flexibility, on range of motion. And that's very different than aerobic exercise, which are much more focused on muscular strength and endurance. And those are very different strategies. When you relax the body, actually you start to relax the mind. So that's why I believe the asanas are more effective at relaxation and stress management than aerobic exercises. Yes?
You said that modern medicine cannot get the treatment of some of these NCDs. Is that the failure of medicine or science?
Well, it's not. The science has got nothing to do. I mean, science is science. Science, of course, is
Well,
not.
science is the basis of medicine, that's what it is.
Well, it's being misused. It's being misapplied. So science, in my opinion, most biomedical researchers are enamored with high technology. If the study is a drug, a molecular biological study, or some kind of high-tech laser-involved technique, that is fancy, that's sexy, that's what gets funded. You address something like children's behavior, children's mood, I mean, that's messy, it's sociological, it's hard to control for. And so there's this mindset in modern biomedicine that if it's a high-tech solution, it's better than, you know, a low-tech solution. And I see that in the study sections and reviewing the grants. It's very apparent. If your grant doesn't have some kind of sexy measure, it will not be funded because it's viewed as soft science. And you know, that pervades medical treatment as well. You know, it's like, you know, the higher tech treatment for a disease is viewed as more favorable. The dream of any cancer scientist or any type 2 diabetic researcher is to develop the pill that cures that disease. That's what they dream about. And it's insane. How can you continue to have lifestyle behaviors that cause that disease, ignore that, and try and treat the symptoms with a pill? It's ridiculous. It's like you have a tree in your front yard, and the leaves are all turning brown. The tree is sick. You go out with a can of green spray paint and you spray the leaves. You have a green tree. But have you cured the problem? No, you haven't even touched the problem. You've treated the symptom, which is your appearance of the tree. And that's the focus of modern medicine right now. It's the acute care model. The doctor gets paid when the patient is sick. So what does the doctor dream about? He dreams about having more sick patients. The system should be the other way around. The doctor should be paid when you stay healthy. Money should be taken away when you get sick because he's failed in his job. But when a doctor sees you, he's not asking about preventive medicine. He's not asking what's your stress level like, what's your sleep like, what are your risk factors like. No, they're looking at, you know, treatments for symptoms. And that's why the system has failed, because we have so much of these risk factors, these poor lifestyle habits. And a lot of them, as I say, are related to stress, awareness, and worldview.
Right. The reason I said about science is that the basic tenets of developing drugs is one molecule to one target.
Right. And the problem is
some
that
of these NCDs are very comprehensive.
yeah, so the view of type 2 diabetes is that it's glucose regulation, okay? It's glucose regulation, it's a mechanism. It's like a robot. You fix the glucose regulation and you're done. The point is that you're developing type 2 diabetes because you have poor low levels of activity, you're not managing stress well, and you're eating garbage food. And you know, that's the problem. The body was not designed to do those things. If you're doing those things, you're killing yourself, basically, and that's why you got the disease. So to try and imagine that you're going to fix that with a pill that just fixes one aspect of glucose regulation is ridiculous.
That's why I was asking about the science. I think it needs to be communicated to people. There is a lot more
There needs to be a shift in mentality. And that is hard to get in this system where everybody's enamored with these high-tech approaches. Yes?
Say some of these diseases are hereditary.
Well, some are. I mean, there are some communicable diseases, and there are some diseases that are genetically, you know, carried on. But, you know, you can change gene expression with these behavioral treatments, you know? So there is some hope for those treatments as well, for those diseases as well. So, for example, multiple sclerosis, there's a number of studies that are showing that yoga has benefit for multiple sclerosis. There's studies that are showing that yoga has benefit for schizophrenia. So, I mean, these are major diseases which largely are inherited, and yet yoga can have an important impact. Why? Because there's self-regulation involved. they can regulate their genes, they can regulate their brain activity through these practices.
I promised that I would get him out of here in time that he wouldn't have to rush traffic and stuff like that. And so I want to thank him very much for being here.